So are you curious about what's going to happen with the Druid in the new player's handbook? Well, you're in luck. Because behind today's secret door, what's in store for the Druid? So behind today's secret door, what's in store for the Druid? This is Secret Door, a channel devoted to in-depth discussions about Dungeons & Dragons, and my name is Matt Morich. Before I get started, I have started a Patreon. If you're interested in supporting the channel, your help would be greatly appreciated and much needed. And many thanks to Marcelo and Doug for your support. Okay, so before I get too far into this, let me just point out that when I'm doing a video like this, like you, I'm seeing these videos. This video is based almost, not entirely, but almost entirely on the Jeremy Crawford interview. Obviously, and this is the most important thing with anyone who's doing videos like this, anybody who gets too upset or crazy about any of these things at this stage in the game, just everybody settle down a little bit. We don't know what the mechanics are yet. All we know is how Crawford is describing it and how we're taking it. So people running around saying this is broken or this is bad, I don't see a whole lot of value in that. And that's very important to note with this video with the Druid, because there are a lot of things that he talks about that aren't going to matter at all until we see the mechanics. I can guess, I can forecast, but I don't know. And when we get to the Circle of the Sea Druid, I think that is where it is the most telling of all. And even Circle of the Land. Both of those classes are going to thrive based upon what their spell list looks like. And while we do know at least a good part of, or maybe all of, the Circle of the Sea's spell list, we don't know what the new spells are. So all I can do is look at those spells as they are in the player's handbook currently and forecast. But any one of those spells might be greatly improved and go from being an okay spell to be a very good spell, or to simply to being a good spell. Or they could just simply be stuck in being okay. So there's not a whole lot of value here in what they're saying until we see the mechanics. But there is still some things that we can glean and some ideas that are worth working out to see if you should be overly excited about the changes for the Druid or not. Now, I happen to love Druids, but when I play a Druid, it's almost entirely going to be in the incarnation of wild shape. That's what I love about the Druid. I loved it when we had the animal companion and wild shape, particularly like in Pathfinder. That was fantastic. I had a lot of fun with that. So a lot of this and a lot of the discussion that they had, actually an enormous amount of the conversation that they had in that interview, and therefore a lot of the conversation I'm going to have with you here, regards wild shape. And once again, the biggest part of the problem, I can only say, and I'll get to the mechanics in just a second, but the evaluation of wild shape is only going to be as good as the beast forms are, because it's still going to be dependent on beast forms. Do we know what the beast forms are? No. So how good is wild shape? How good will Circle of the Moon be? Well, I don't know. I don't know. What we can talk about a bit more intelligently is the basic mechanics of wild shape and what they're going to look like, because they were fairly specific there. Now, the other resource that I looked at for this video, one of my Patreon members had mentioned that on D&D Beyond, they were posting articles that go a little bit more in depth about certain topics of these new classes. There was a little bit more there. It didn't discuss the Druid in depth, but it did go in pretty good depth about the wild shape mechanics themselves. But again, nothing about the beast forms themselves. But it is a good point to note that D&D Beyond's articles will be a good resource to be able to see a little bit more specifically what kinds of things you can expect. So the 4 circles that will be in the player's handbook will be Circle of the Moon, Land, Stars, and a new circle, the Circle of the Seas. In the interview, Crawford talks about the leveled circle features as they occur with everyone except for Circle of the Stars, because apparently that didn't change very much. That's a good point here. I'm not going to be talking almost at all about Circle of the Stars because it had almost no changes according to Jeremy Crawford. Although, as he points out, because the Druid itself, the core class, changed, that will, of course, impact how good Circle of the Stars Druid is and how it plays out. Before I get into Wild Shape and the other mechanics, let me just point out that I think that the Druid has been largely a slept-on class in 5th edition. The Druid's spell list in the Old Player's Handbook was a pretty good spell list. And if you look at subclasses for the Druid like Circle of the Stars, they can be remarkably effective casters. But the Druid is one of those classes that is, rightly or wrongly, always going to be associated with Wild Shape. I'm one of those people, probably wrongly. That is entirely what I want when I'm playing a Druid, is I want to turn into a bear or a saber-toothed tiger or something to that effect. That's what I want out of a Druid. But if you wanted to play a pure caster, Circle of the Stars is remarkably effective. Now, I'm saying all this to say that when I go through these mechanics, they're probably not going to blow your hair back. And what that should tell you is that the designers felt the Druid was pretty good as is, despite how the community may feel about the Druid. What they did bend over backwards, though, to do is to do something with Wild Shape, which was, in my opinion, a good ability, but it was a problem ability. Whether they fixed it or not, I have some ideas which would say that it's good and bad what they did to it, and we'll talk about that in just a second as we talk about Wild Shape. The first point about Wild Shape is that it is now basically a universal resource for any Druid. Now, if you're going to play Circle of the Moon, obviously that's going to be your go-to resource because that's what gets you into your beast forms, and that's what you want to do if you're Circle of the Moon. But for everybody else, Wild Shape is essentially a utility feature. But now they're turning it into a resource that you can turn Wild Shape into other things. And we saw this with Circle of the Stars. Circle of the Sea will follow suit with this rather heavily, and Circle of the Land will even have opportunities to use it as well. But one thing that any Druid can do, and I'm speaking broadly here, I'm not talking about at what level, you'll be able to exchange a use of Wild Shape for a first level spell slot. Now, that's not an overwhelmingly great trade, in my opinion, but if you're Circle of the Land, say, or any of the other casters, anybody but Circle of the Moon, a first level spell slot in the hands of a Druid, that could be a lot of things. That's Goodberry, for example. That's going to be useful. It's certainly more useful to you than a dead use of Wild Shape. So, good ability. Nice upgrade. Conversely, you're going to be able to trade a spell slot to get a use of Wild Shape. Now, this ability is something I'm going to be referring to a lot, and not as often about, well, I will talk about that greatly about Circle of the Moon, but Circle of the Stars and Circle of the Sea, this is an important feature for them, too. All of this, of course, is potentially, because the mechanics, I don't know what they are. None of us do, so I'm guessing. But overall, I would say that those two changes are very strong. Like I said, I think the Druid was already a pretty powerful class. So anytime you're going to give it a little bit you're nudging it even a little bit. How powerful is it going to end up making it? Or did they do enough? I don't know yet. But let's just get right into the biggest change with Wild Shape, which is how the beast form affects you. Now, I don't know that it works exactly the same as it did in the old Player's Handbook, but we do know there is one change that is very different, and that is that you do not get the new pool of hit points. So, for example, if you were to turn into a bear, you wouldn't have 34 hit points or whatever the bear, I think it's 34. You wouldn't have those hit points as a separate pool. You would instead gain temporary hit points. Now, any druid, when they wild shape, is going to gain temporary hit points equal to their druid level. That's not fantastic. However, the Circle of the Moon druid is going to get them at 3 times their druid level. But it doesn't take a genius to figure out that the druid is still, Circle of the Moon druid is still coming out short in that equation in terms of total hit points. The advantage, of course, is that it's impossible for you now to get knocked out of the wild shape form. So you don't lose the wild shape if you lose the temporary hit points. You start, in fact, just taking hit points from your own pool. So it's going to be far more feasible to stay in that wild shape much, much longer, but you are doing so at the risk of your own hit points. So it's a little bit stronger on one hand, and it's kind of substantially weaker in terms of total hit points on the other. For Circle of the Moon, I'm talking. But this is where we get into the interesting idea here. You're going to have more access to more uses of wild shape in a day. What we don't know is the absolute mechanics. We do know that it takes a bonus action, that everybody now gets a bonus action to wild shape. What is interesting is what the mechanics are if you were to wild shape, say, while you're wild shaped. I haven't seen how it's written yet, but if it's theoretically possible for you to say, like, let's say you were a bear and you wanted to turn into a squirrel, could you go from bear to squirrel, or do you have to go bear to druid to squirrel? That distinction is a bit important. If you're able to go from one form to another, then theoretically, and again, this is just me guessing and thinking about power gaming here, but if you were able to go from one form to another, and I wouldn't see why you couldn't, but if you could, then let's say you're a 5th level druid, Circle of the Moon druid, and you have lost your temporary hit points that you had got with, let's say, the bear. Could you then use another wild shape to wild shape into another bear? It would cost you a bonus action to do this and a cost of your wild shape, but you would get the temporary hit points again. And so conversely, if you were then to start thinking of spell slot conversions into uses of wild shape, then now you're looking at a 1st level spell slot. Let's say you're an 8th level druid, Circle of the Moon druid. A 1st level spell slot is buying you 24 temporary hit points. That's an amazing bargain. It's a great bargain at 15. But Crawford did say that healing spells were going to be amplified. How much they're going to be amplified, I don't know. But a Circle of the Moon druid will be able to cast healing spells and then a small suite of other spells as a leveled feature of the circle. But that value that a Circle of the Moon druid could achieve, so again, saying you're a 5th level druid, Circle of the Moon druid, then you've got that 15 temporary hit points, you burn a use of wild shape as a bonus action. The bear doesn't need a bonus action for anything, at least as far as I know. And now you've got an extra 15 temporary hit points, and so on, et cetera, et cetera. That is interesting. As far as what Crawford was saying was that you could convert spell slots to wild shape pretty much as you wanted, but you couldn't convert wild shape to spell slots more than once a day. So on one hand, the Circle of the Moon druid took a real hit in tankiness, and on the other hand, through that mechanic, it potentially, and I'm not saying that I'm right that you could do this even, but if you could pull something like that off, well, that is a pretty hard to kill character. The other thing about Circle of the Moon Druids that they are going to get as an upgrade, and it's a substantial upgrade. There's 2. They'll now have the option of either taking the Beast's armor class or having a 13 plus their Wisdom modifier as their new armor class in the Beast form. That is huge. And it may not sound like a big deal to have a 17 or an 18 armor class, but for a Circle of the Moon Druid that's used to just getting hit every single time they're in bear form, being occasionally missed is nice. The other upgrade, and this is just true for Wild Shape in general, is that when you Wild Shape, you can communicate normally. Oh. I can't tell you how much of a relief that is as someone that loves role-playing and loves playing these kind of characters. That is a huge, huge bonus. Now, jumping back into an early decision at I believe it's at first level, you make a decision. All Druids do. Because remember now, all subclasses are now done at 3rd level. So Circle of the Moon is taking a hit there too, because they were getting that bear opportunity at level 2. Now they have to wait till level 3. So how good those beast forms are is going to be critical for Circle of the Moon. But anyway, everyone's going to have this choice of going Warden or Magician as a Druid. If you go Warden, you get access to medium armor and you gain and martial weapons. And as a Magician, you gain access to an extra cantrip and you gain a bonus to your nature or arcana checks. Now, Crawford in the interview is trying to sell this as a really big upgrade, but to me, this is just clearly almost a stealth nerf. All Druids got medium armor, albeit restricted medium armor, and shields before. They didn't get martial weapons. I don't know how big of a deal that is. We'll have to see the mechanics of it. Is getting a cantrip a big deal? These are choices that you'll be able to amplify as you go along through your career, and they certainly do get better. But at first level, is that an upgrade or is it a stealth nerf? I can't imagine personally playing any of the other, like if I were playing Circle of the Sea or Circle of the Stars, from what let's say Circle of the Stars, I can't imagine not taking Warden because I'm going to want the armor class. If I were playing another Circle Wizard that was using spells primarily and didn't care about Wild Shape, I would go Warden, I would imagine, because as a full caster, the ability to get medium armor is a nice, huge upgrade. And it's far more attractive than an extra cantrip. But the real point is if you wanted to have that extra cantrip and that extra little ability there, you are paying a price compared to the old Druid. So it's a stealth, in a way, it's a stealth nerf. It's a best equal, but again, based on what I know right now. The mechanics of this may make it much, much different. But from what he was describing, this is not a big, big deal. And of course, as we saw with Intasha's, the Druid will also always have the ability to use Wild Shape to spend a use of Wild Shape to find familiar. Will that last in the same duration as it did in Tasha's? I don't know. But that's a nice option to have as well. So Wild Shape is now just a resource to spend. And this is a trend that we're seeing in certain classes as he's talked about them. Looking at class features as a resource to be able to use alternatively than how they have been traditionally used. And I applaud this kind of thinking. I think that it is always interesting to give the player a lot more choices that make sense for that character. Now, how good these choices are, it'll get down to the execution of the rules themselves. Now, talking about the other circles themselves and the changes that they are undergoing, the rest of the circles are largely dependent upon their spell list. We kind of can guess what Circle of Stars is going to look like because he essentially hints that that didn't change really, other than the Druid class itself. But everybody else, the land and the Circle of the Sea, it's based upon what their spell list is going to matter here. Now, Circle of the Land got a potentially amazing upgrade in that before, if you went Circle of the Land, you picked what land type it was. That gave you a spell list. Boom. Now, after a long rest, Circle of the Land is going to be able to pick, again, whatever land they were wanting to associate with or commune with or whatever the phrase will be. And they'll get access to that spell list. Even if I knew what those spell lists were, I wouldn't know how good that ability is because I need to know what the spells look like in this new player's handbook. But in general, that's a really great ability. Now, he also did say that those spell lists for each of those land types are going to be optimized. But in general, it should be a very good ability if that's the kind of druid you're wanting to play as a Circle of the Land druid. The ability after every long rest to be able to pick one, I believe he said 4 types, to basically have 4 different spell lists available to you at the beginning of each day as bonus spell lists is fantastic. Circle of the Land also is going to have another unique way to spend their wild shape. I believe that is tied to Land's Aid, and this is again one of those things that it was talked about very nebulously. You can cause an eruption of nature that can be used either to heal or to harm. The way that it was also discussed, it might sound like it could potentially do both. Again, it was a very nebulous part of the conversation. But it is obviously a way for Circle of the Land druid to be able to use their wild shape, presumably, in an effective way. And the level 14 version of Land's Aid causes trees and vines to burst out all over the place so that all of your allies will gain half cover and they'll gain resistance to whatever damage type you took at 10th level from that ability. So interesting. And that is a bit more concrete. And obviously, being able to have a resistance type that you're getting to pick from every day and be able to share that with your allies and giving half cover, that's all great and a fantastic bargain for our use of wild shape. But it's a level 14 ability, so it better be good. Circle of the Sea will get an ability to use their wild shape to create the new term for an area of effect or an aura effect is an emanation. So this would be an emanation that once per turn you're going to be able to cause an opponent to make a Constitution saving throw. And if they fail, they take some cold damage. We don't know how much. And they can be potentially pushed, and I don't know how far, and et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know how big the aura is, et cetera, et cetera. But again, a nice use of wild shape. If it is a mirror to Circle of the Stars, and I would strongly suspect that it is, Circle of the Stars lasts 10 minutes. So if the Wrath lasts 10 minutes, that's a good ability. That's a good use. How good the ability is, we don't know. I suspect it will be fairly strong. It's certainly an evocative and cool looking idea. Now, Circle of the Sea, we get a spell list that gives you something like Ray of Frost, Fog Cloud, and I'm not going to list them all here, but I want you to get the idea. Ray of Frost, Fog Cloud, Shatter, Thunder Wave, eventually Hold Monster, good spell, Ice Storm, Gust of Wind, Shatter, did I say Shatter? And Lightning Bolt and Water Breathing, and I think I'm missing one of them. But, okay, everything I just read off, I think Fog Cloud is a good spell and can be a very good spell if the circumstances are right. But it's generally speaking, I would say, a good spell. But again, that's the Fog Cloud from the old player's handbook. I don't know what the new Fog Cloud is going to look like. All these other spells that I just listed off, they're all fine. They're solid spells. I wouldn't say that they're good. I certainly don't think any of them are particularly very good. Hold Monster is one of those spells that if it works, it's great. And if it doesn't, well, that's one of those things. But all the other ones are solid spells. They're solid. You would never feel dumb for using them. You would feel good that they're on your list, but they're not oh wow spells. But again, that evaluation is based upon what they were in the old player's handbook. Did a lightning bolt get a lot of love? I would bet that it probably got some love because nobody uses it. Shatter for its level? Yeah, I mean, it's one of those spells that's right in that zone of solid to good. It's right there. It might even be like on the bottom line of good, in my opinion. The rest are simply solid spells. But again, all of them could be much better, or all it takes is, all you really want out of a spell list like this really is if you can get one oh wow spell out of a spell list like this, that's great. If the rest of them are just solid, then that's fantastic. At this point, I would say they're all at least solid, because my guess is that all of these are going to be at least a little bit better than they were before. So they could all be good spells. And if that's the case, that's a fantastic list. So it's just really frustrating for me to sit here and try and tell you if it's good or bad, because how could I know? All I can do is take a guess based on where they were. And that's kind of my feeling about the whole thing with the Druid, is there's just too much that we don't know. There's a lot of the mechanics that were talked about in some detail, but until you actually see the fine details of it, it doesn't really matter. And with the spell lists, like I just was talking about, it doesn't really matter until you know how good those spells actually are going to be. In general, I think that it looks promising, and my thesis statement from the beginning was, I think that they felt that the Druid was already pretty darn good, and I would tend to agree with that feeling. So it only needed so much help. We'll have to see how much Wild Shape got fixed based upon how those stat blocks look for the beasts, and for everybody else, we're going to see based upon what the spells look like. And that's really what it gets down to. Well, that's all I've got. If you enjoyed the video, please like, please share, please subscribe. And if you're stuck and you don't know where to go, you can always search for a secret door. Until next time, I cast bless on all of you.